Hello, dear friends. Today is August 16th, 2025, and we have prepared for you another overview of the operational battlefield map. The summit between the leaders of the United States and Russia is now behind us, but the front line has not become frozen. At the moment, the most noticeable changes are taking place on the South Donetsk and Pokrovsk directions, and it is on these that we will focus in this report. Before we begin, I would like, as usual, to ask you to support the channel by subscribing. This really helps its development. If you've watched our videos before but haven't subscribed yet, I'd greatly appreciate it if you fix that right now. A huge thank you to everyone who has already done so. And now let's move on to the situation in the Kherson direction. Over the past day, a single airstrike by the Russian aerospace forces was recorded near the settlement of Kamyshany. A day earlier, strikes targeted the outskirts of Antonovka, Nikolskoye, and Tokarevka. In addition, reports came in about the use of Russian FPV drones against Ukrainian armed forces positions in Antonovka itself and near Pridneprovskoye. Ukrainian sources claim that all drone attacks were repelled. However, it is worth noting that such drones operate actively almost along the entire contact line, not always being recorded, while the front line here remains stable. For the most part, artillery and drones continue to be the main means of engagement. Now let's move to the Orekov direction. At the moment, no significant changes are observed. On the map, positional battles continue near Plavny and Stepnogorsk. Russian positions came under FPV drone strikes near Kamenskoye and Stepovoye. Fighting is also ongoing near Novoandreyevka, Novodanilovka, and Malaya Tokmachka, but without notable shifts on the front line. Let's take a look at the situation in Malinovka, which belongs to the Guliay-Pol direction. Today, the situation there is unchanged. But yesterday, movements were reported between Malinovka and Novozlatopol. The pocket that had formed there has been completely cleared and brought under Russian control. Today, it became known that Ukrainian units attempted a counterattack on the western outskirts of Malinovka, but according to Russian reports, the attack was repelled. At the same time, strikes were carried out against Ukrainian positions near Poltavka and Olgovskoye. But the map in this area remains unchanged. Next, let's note the events in the area of Timirovka and Zelenoye Pol. Here, the zone of control of the Russian armed forces has expanded with an advance of up to 2 kilometers, and the entire designated section has come under Russian control. Novogeorgievka and Kamyshevka came under attack. In Kamyshevka, there has been no advance yet, but several sources claim that Russian troops have already approached the settlement closely. Official changes will be marked only after confirming evidence appears. Now, regarding the so-called cauldron between Voskresenka and Mironoye, it has been completely cleared and secured by the Russian army. Video confirmations have been received, and we are marking this area in red. Moreover, Russian troops have entered Alexandrograd and consolidated there. A few days ago, rumors circulated that they were holding this settlement, but no proof was available at the time. Today, however, a video from forward positions was released, showing an advance of up to 4 kilometers and the full establishment of control. Now, judging by the deployment of forces from Alexandrograd, Malievka, and Voskresenka, Russian troops are exerting pressure on Seknovoye. Repeated reports of attacks on this settlement have surfaced, and it cannot be ruled out that within the coming week it too will fall under Russian control. As for Andreyevka-Klevtsovo, this settlement is now firmly secured by the Russian side. The advance came from 2 directions, from Zeleny Gai and Podubnoye along the supply line. The entire designated area has been cleared and brought under Russian control. Demining is currently being carried out between Andreyevka, Klevtsovo, and Tolstoye, as well as between Andreyevka, Klevtsovo, and Alexandrograd. Estimates suggest that within a week the control zone will expand further. The advance amounted to up to 6 kilometers. Russian units also attacked Ukrainian positions near Ivanovka, north of Zeleny Gai, and in the settlement of Filia, which already belongs to Dnipropetrovsk region. Reports emerged that the Volchya River had been crossed and Russian forces had secured Ivanovka, but so far this has not been confirmed. Therefore, the map here remains unchanged. Now to Orekhovo. Here, the Russian armed forces are expanding their control perimeter especially in the area between Orikovo and Daknoye. Today, the first confirmations appeared. A small section has been marked in red, indicating advance and demining. But it is important to understand that the real zone of control is most likely wider than what is shown on the map, since new markings appear only after official evidence. Moving on to the settlement of Udaknoye, reports suggest that Russian forces have practically established control over it. The Ukrainian side denies this. No confirming video evidence has surfaced yet, so no map changes have been marked. At the same time, news reports indicate that the settlement may already be in the hands of the Russian armed forces, with fighting continuing to the north. Fierce clashes are also taking place in Kotlino. On the Pokrovsk direction, in the area of Rodinskoye, there are reports of an expanded zone of control for Russian troops. It is assumed that most of the settlement has already come under their authority, but confirmation is still lacking. Preliminary estimates suggest an advance of 2.5 kilometers. Reports are also coming in about actions near Krasny Lyman and Mirnograd. Recall that earlier the approach to Mirnograd was complicated by industrial facilities near Novoekonomichnoye. Today, however, a video appeared showing an advance of 1.5 kilometers and part of the industrial zone passing under Russian control. This concerns the mines located in that area. North of the area, let's note the events near Suketskoye. Here, Ukrainian forces launched a counterattack and regained control of Nikonorovka. On the map, this section is marked in yellow. It is also reported that near Kolodets, a Russian grouping was cut off from supply lines. All this indicates that the previous advance of the Russian armed forces in this sector has been halted. At the same time, video materials have appeared from Vesyoloye, confirming the presence of Russian troops. This territory has come under their control, despite severed supply routes. We continue to monitor the developments on this section of the front and move on. The next points of attention are the settlements of Poltavka and Rusin Yar. At the moment, no reliable information has been received from the Poltavka area. Earlier, reports appeared in the news format that Russian forces were conducting clearing operations in the pocket that had formed between Poltavka and Rusin Yar. Some pro-Russian sources claimed that the pocket had already been eliminated and the territory had come under their control. However, it is now clear that these statements were premature and did not reflect the actual situation. Therefore, today there are no changes on the map here. Let's move further to the Konstantinovka direction, towards the Sherbinovka area. The Russian Ministry of Defense officially announced that the settlement has been fully secured by the Russian army. On the map, this is confirmed by a small section of fighting marked in red. This territory has passed under the control of Russian forces. Previously, adjacent sections that had also gone to the Russian armed forces were added here. In fact, the Ukrainian grouping here ended up without supply, completely isolated. Some of the servicemen left Shcherbanovka and the surrounding areas, but others remained. It can be assumed that the entire territory is already under Russian control and, at the moment, clearing operations are ongoing there. It has been repeatedly reported that Katarinovka and Klebanbek are also under the control of the Russian armed forces. Moreover, information circulated about clashes inside Klebanbek itself, but so far there are no reliable confirmations. From Katarinovka, unlike that, videos showing Russian positions have already appeared. It is not excluded that in the coming days, similar materials will surface regarding Klebanbek as well. Overall, the impression is that Russian units are gradually taking control of the entire territory, from Alexandro Kalinovo to the Klebanbek reservoir. It is likely that as early as next week, this zone will be completely cleared. Attacks were also reported on Pleshcheyevka, where Ukrainian positions came under strikes. Strikes are also being carried out against Alexandro Shultino, but as of today, no advances have been recorded. Let me remind you that the map is updated only after confirmations are received. Now to the Chasov Yar direction, which gradually merges with the Konstantinovka direction. Fierce fighting is taking place near Predtechino and Stupochki, as well as strikes on Ukrainian armed forces positions near Myskoye. According to several reports, Russian forces managed to enter Myskoye and consolidate there. It cannot be ruled out that by the time of this report's recording, the settlement has already come fully under Russian control. Let's shift to the Seversk direction. Here, activity has significantly increased. Practically along the entire contact line, the Russian army is exerting pressure on Ukrainian positions. The Ukrainian armed forces, in response, are actively using FPV drones to hold back the advance. On the Russian side, kamikaze drones and artillery are also being employed. The infantry has not yet demonstrated significant progress. Today, strikes were carried out against Seversk itself and against Ukrainian positions in Serebryanka. It should be clarified, Serebryanka remains partially under Ukrainian army control, with its center held in the grey zone. Although Russian forces have secured part of the territory, Ukrainian troops have repeatedly launched counterattacks. Therefore, it can be stated that the western part of the settlement remains with the Ukrainian armed forces, the east is controlled by the Russians, while the center is still contested. In the Serebryansky forest, the Ukrainian side also attempted a counterattack but did not succeed. As a result, the advance of Russian troops here has somewhat slowed. Now let's move to the Krasny-Liman direction. According to Russian sources, the control zone is expanding near Torskoye, Zarakhnoye, Kolodetsy and Shandrigolovo. However, no significant changes have yet taken place. The information comes in the format of news updates. Positional clashes are ongoing, and territory is gradually being consolidated by the Russian armed forces, but confirmations are still insufficient for map updates. On the Kupiansk direction, there are also no major changes. Positional fighting continues along the entire contact line. Near Glushkovka, Ukrainian armed forces positions were attacked. Recall that earlier battles took place near Kruglyakhovka and Kolesnikovka. Strikes were also recorded near Zagrizovo, Boguslavka, and Novokruglyakhovka. However, this is daily activity that does not alter the map. A similar situation persists on the Kharkov and Veliky Burluk directions. Local fighting continues there, including near Katne and Ambanoye, as well as on the approaches to Melovoye, where Russian positions came under attack. In Volchansk as well, positional battles. The Liptsy direction remains unchanged. Active engagements are recorded, but the control lines stay the same. As for the Sumy direction, here we are observing a temporary pause in the offensive. Despite fierce clashes along the entire front line, the Ukrainian army managed to bring in reserves and is conducting counterattacks, attempting to push back Russian forces. However, they are failing to achieve success. The Russian side has paused its advance here. Although earlier statements were made about Russian plans to reach Sumy, at the moment no advance is recorded. FPV drones are actively operating on both sides in this area. Some commentators recall earlier breakthroughs of tens of kilometers, but the current conflict works differently. Drones are used first, and only then is infantry deployed. That is why comparing modern warfare to the events of the Great Patriotic War is inaccurate. That's all the main news for today. Thank you for your attention and for watching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next updates. See you soon.